Hello and welcome to Written Words. I'm Helen, and in today's video I'm going to look at a little bit of grammar, and in particular at two pairs of words which often cause confusion, especially among native speakers, interestingly. Let's start by taking a look at a couple of sentences. Which of these is correct? He was stood in the middle of the room. He was standing in the middle of the room. And I am sat on the train. Or I am sitting on the train. So our two pairs of words are stood, standing, sat, and sitting. So let's explore which ones are needed in which situations. First of all, stood and sat are used in the simple past tense. The simple past tense is what it sounds like. It's the past and it's simple. All you need are two things. You need the person and the verb. So I stood, she sat, we stood, they sat. You just need the person and the verb and you've got a past tense. So for example, they stood outside the bar and waited for it to open. Or she sat next to her friend. Stood and sat can also be something called a past participle. That's a different way of making a different kind of past tense. It's where we use an extra word like have or has or had. So for example, I have stood here many times before. Or he had already sat down before she offered him a seat. So those are two ways where stood and sat are needed. So let's move on to standing and sitting. I mentioned a past participle. Standing and sitting are what are known as a present participle. And this is a word which is used with other words such as am, is, are, or was and were. So for example, I am standing at the bus stop right now. Or she was sitting in the waiting room when her phone rang. So where does the confusion come from? The confusion is quite understandable when you realise that stood and sat are used with was in some regional dialects of English. So in some places, English speakers will say I was stood or he was sat. And that is acceptable in the regional dialect of that area. However, it is not considered standard English. So if you're writing, you need to use what is accepted as standard English, unless, of course, this is the dialogue of a character who is using regional English. But in the main body of the narrative, standard English is best to use. Standing and sitting can also be used as adjectives. For example, in the sentence, I saw him standing there. And there is one more context to add to this, which also adds to the confusion. Stood and sat can be used with was or were as the object instead of the subject of the sentence. The object is the person or thing in the sentence which is having the action done to them. So in this context, the person or thing is made to stand or sit by someone else. So for example, she was sat next to her brother would mean that somebody had told her to sit next to her brother. For example, the teacher told her to sit next to her brother, so she was sat next to her brother. So let's now look at some examples from literature. I took two books and picked out some examples where these words are used in those books. So my first few examples are from Frankenstein, as that's a book that I've been reading quite recently, and my previous video was about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So let's have a look at some examples from there. First of all, an old and beautiful oak which stood about 20 yards from our house. There's quite a lot of words there, but if we peel away some of the extra words until we get the words that we're concentrating on, we have an oak stood. It's the simple past. There's no was, were, am, or anything like that. It's just the subject and the verb. The oak stood. Simple past. Then we have, it stopped just where I was standing. So this time we have a present participle. I was standing. Then we have, for some time I sat upon the rock that overlooks the sea of ice. Again, peel away all the extra words and we have I sat. It's very simple because it's the simple past. And then we have, we entered the gloomy prison chamber and beheld Justin sitting on some straw at the further end. So here is an example of where sitting has been used as an adjective. And the other book is a more modern one. I took my other examples from Here One Moment by Liane Moriarty. So let's take a look at those. I remember him. I stood behind him in the security line at Hobart Airport. So here we have I stood. Just the two words, it's the simple past. Then we have an old lady is standing in the aisle looking at her. So this is the present tense. So we have a present participle, is standing. Then we have a woman in a leopard print jumpsuit sat on a high stool at the bar. Peel away all the extra information and you've got a woman sat. No was, no is, it's just the simple past. He leans forward to address the man sitting next to Sue. Here we have sitting used as an adjective, but also the two words who is are implied here. He leans forward to address the man who is sitting next to Sue. So if those two words were there, it would be a present participle, who is sitting, in the present tense. And lastly, we have, he never looks more comfortable or smug than when he's sitting on his daddy's lap. He's is short for he is. So sitting is the present participle. So to go back to my question from the beginning, which of the sentences I read out are correct? He was standing in the middle of the room, or he was stood in the middle of the room. Well, because we've got was, we need standing. The alternative would be to say he stood in the middle of the room, which is also the past, but with a slightly different implication to it. Was standing is a continuous action, whereas stood is a finished action. So he was standing in the middle of the room might lead to you talking about something else that was going on at the same time while he was standing in the middle of the room, because this was an ongoing action. Whereas he stood in the middle of the room is something he did and then something else happened. He stood in the middle of the room and then he started talking. In standard English, if you heard the phrase he was stood, that would imply that somebody put him there. For example, the soldier stood him in the middle of the room, meaning he forcibly made him stand there. And for the other pair of sentences, the correct version would be I am sitting on the train, because it's the present tense. You need the present participle. I am sitting. You may hear somebody say, I am sat on the train, but that is non-standard English and best avoided in your writing. So I hope that has clarified some of the confusion surrounding these two pairs of words. Do take a look when you're reading and see if you can spot uses of sat, sitting, stood and standing. And if you're around people speaking, see if you can hear the differences between the way English is spoken and the way it is written. So thank you very much for joining me in this video. I look forward to seeing you in my next one, in which I'm going to share a story. In the meantime, happy reading and happy writing.